Welcome to AFLEET 2017 tutorial 5 out of 5. In this video, I'll introduce you to the idling reduction calculator, or IR for short. This calculator is a new feature of the 2017 version of the tool. Vehicles idle for a variety of reasons, for example, police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. These often idle to provide power to electronics. A stark example is long-haul trucks. Their drivers often idle their engines overnight so they can keep the temperature comfortable inside the cab where they're sleeping. And many vehicles idle while they're waiting. In cold weather, vehicles idle to warm up the engine. So there's a lot of reasons, but leaving the engine running wastes fuel, which is expensive, and it also produces unnecessary emissions. So there are a variety of technologies available on the market that make it so you can have the services you need without idling your engine. And this tool provides a comparison for some of those technologies. So let's take a look. So the inputs for the idling reduction calculator are a little different than for the other calculators. There's a different section, and we'll get to that in a bit. So all we care about IR, outputs, and inputs. So here we go, inputs tab. You need your location, as always. And for the idling reduction calculator, you can ignore all of these. You don't need any of that. Yeah. We do, however, need the fueling type, public or private station, and we need pricing for the fuels. This is so when we look at how much fuel is being used from idling and the idling technologies, we can put a price to how much money that translates to. Okay. And can ignore total cost of ownership, inputs. So the fuel production assumptions, this is used for everyone. It is worth noting though that currently the tool it assumes that the vehicle that you're using is either gasoline if it's light duty or diesel if it's heavy duty. It doesn't have alternative vehicles as an option, although it is true that alternative fuel vehicles will still idle and still, waste energy. But currently the tool only supports gasoline, light duty, and diesel, heavy duty for the idling reduction calculator. It has it for all the other ones, but not for the idling reduction. So maybe in the future this will be, it'll add more options, but right now it's just the common ones. So when we look at the fuel production assumptions, that means that none of this really applies because we're only looking at gasoline. The one thing that you do want to take a look at, the source of electricity. So a lot of the technologies that help with the idling, they run on electricity, and this will factor into the environmental analysis. So that's really the only one that matters for the tool. And if you want to look at as I've mentioned in all the other tutorials, if you want to look at a more comprehensive look at the emissions from your fuel and the pollutants and stuff that come from that, you can choose the various options. The original tool, AFLEET 2013 and AFLEET 2016 didn't have this option. They only had, it would have just been option 1. So if you want to include more upstream stuff, you can have option 2. If you want the most comprehensive one, which includes vehicle cycle, choose option 3, but that's only for light duty vehicles. So make sure that's good. All right, so this is the main thing. So for the idling reduction calculator, you've got this whole separate area which is only for this calculator, and I'll show you I'll walk you through using it. So we've got, this is the light duty right here. So if you're only looking at heavy duty, you can ignore that. This is heavy duty right here, just same as light duty. If you're not looking at light duty, you can ignore that and only focus on heavy duty. So first, I'll show you how to just quantify the impacts of your current idling without even looking at the technologies in place. So let's look at let's just go with a combination long haul truck, because these are pretty long haul freight trucks. These are pretty much the trucks that tend to idle the most, because they're doing the overnight idling. So it's the tool's mainly for these guys, but we also have options for all the other ones. So in this case, you just choose your truck. And if you want to change the vocation, you would click on the hyperlink right here, and it'll bring you to a different section than it brings you to so up here, if you're using the tool for other things and you clicked on here, it would bring you up here. But as you can see, it is a different section of the tool. We have a separate selection menu. So if you're trying to change that, it brings you, as you can see, near the bottom, and it's a different menu. So I have combination long haul truck. There's only one option for this one, but other ones have more options. So okay, so I'm gonna look at a long haul freight truck, and I'm just saying, let's say it's a 2017 model, because I want to keep that. And yeah, so the important thing here is getting a good estimate for how many hours that you're idling. If it is tricky to know for sure how much you are, but if you know, for instance, if you know how many, if you can get an estimate for how many hours you're idling each day, and then you can multiply by the numbers, or the number of days that you're operating the vehicle, then you can kind of get an estimate. So this is up to you to find a kind of a good number for how many hours you're idling each vehicle per year. And by the way, this is if you're looking at multiple vehicles, like 5 or more or anything, this is the per vehicle number. So we're assuming that they're all the same, which is it's an assumption, but Okay, and so as you can see right here, for the light duty, you just have the model year and the idling hours. For heavy duty, there's a separate section for a different type of idling. So this is only applicable for the long haul truck, or the ones that hoteling is essentially the practice of idling your engine overnight. So this is only applicable really for the trucks that do this. Otherwise, let's choose a different one. You see it just goes to 0 because it's not something that's really going to be happening with the other ones. However, for long haul trucks, it's a substantial amount of hours. And the reason why we have it separate is because the emissions data that we have so far seems to indicate that it's actually it behaves a little differently from regular idling when you idle it for overnight. So that's kind of interesting, but yeah, so you estimate how much you're doing overnight in this case, and you'd estimate just maybe if you're idling, over the course of the day, or waiting at truck stops, and you'd have some sort of number for that as well. So that's really, oh yeah, and the number of vehicles. I'm just gonna look at, let's just say I've got one vehicle. Just want to look at that. So that's really, if you just want to look at the effects of your idling, that's all you have to do, is just fill out this area right here, or this area right here, and gasoline would be 1 for light duty. And then here's what it'll look like. You just put in right here, and then go over to the IR outputs, and you'll see this is the diesel heavy duty vehicle. For the fleet, it kind of tells you the operating cost in terms of all the fuel that you're using on your idling each year, and it has some values for emissions and externality costs. Yeah, but it's not really doing any of the payback comparisons, because the rest of the tool is for looking at the various technologies that we have. So you can just use this to look at how much fuel is being used and stuff. So let's say you look at this number and you're like, shoot, well, I want to improve upon this. I want to maybe invest in an idling reduction technology, then you would use the rest of the tool. And in that case, you need to fill out this area. And this is probably one of the trickiest areas to estimate, because you're probably not going to know for sure what this is. But essentially what we're looking at is for this, let's say we're hoteling, which means we're idling our engine overnight for this many hours. The question here is, what services are you idling your engine for? For instance, we've got the list of technologies available for light duty and heavy duty vehicles, and you can see right here it tells you which services each of these technologies will provide. So, for instance, you look at the fuel-operated coolant heater. You probably use this in cold weather. This is addressing the issue of when people idle to warm up their engines. You don't have to do that. There's a coolant heater that'll do it. And it provides, as you can see, engine heating. So there's a check right there. And but it doesn't provide, for instance, cooling or electrical activity or vehicle heating. So if you're kind of just looking at, if the main reason that you're idling your engine is for electrical purposes, let's say you were, short haul truck. I'm just going to give you a quick example right here. Short haul truck, there we go. Yeah, so let's say you were a fire truck, and pretty much the main reason you're idling your engine is because you have to have your lights going at a fire or something, and that's entirely electrical. In that case, you would simply just type in 0 and 0 for these. So 100% of the idling, or the idling hours, is essentially because you need electrical activity. Let's say we've got like 100 or something. No, actually, let's just say it's a lot, but let's just say 200. You're idling your fire truck for 200 hours each year. And the reason you're idling it is 100% of the time because you need electricity. So in that case, as you can see, I'm going to unselect these because hoteling's not relevant. You can see that when neither of them are selected, it still tells you if it'll provide it, but then if you've selected something that has a check mark, you'll get the check mark in a circle. So you can kind of see that. So what's going on right here is it takes this number and it takes this percent and it creates the hours that are feasible for a certain technology to reduce. So in this case, because all of your idling is because of electricity and all of these technologies provide electricity, the tool will say that all of these hours are potentially up for reducing. So this gets a little different when you have, let's say you need vehicle heating. You had, I don't know, let's say 50%. Then as you can see, now we've got this one only provides electricity, so out of the 200 hours, it could probably only reduce 100 hours of idling. And this one provides all of them, so you could get 200 hours reduced. So that's just something, if you're wondering what the reduction goal is. Yeah, so that was a bit lengthy, but the trickiest part is probably figuring out what estimates you want to make for the services required, because that'll affect the hours reduced. And then this value is taken and used throughout the tool. Okay, so going back to my sleeper truck, there we go. And I'll just go back to the default values. This one is that guy. This one's already in that one. There we go, back to the default values, just because, just assuming it's a third and you don't need engine heating. So let's say I'm looking at let's say 4 vehicles. 4 diesel long-haul freight trucks, and they've got a lot of idling, and we've looked at this and we've seen that's a lot of money, that's a lot of emissions. We want to reduce it. So let's see, well, now we can look at our options, and if you want to just compare all of them, just click and drag and make sure that they're all the same. If you don't want to compare some of these, so you're not interested in single system truck stop electrification, then just put a 0, and that will be empty on the IR outputs. So then the other major thing that this is really tricky to get, but you really need good values for this. For the various technologies, the manufacturer of the technology will probably have this information, but due to trade secrets and how competitive the market is, they might not be as forthcoming with giving out these values. So the people who made the tool spent a lot of time on finding decent estimates for these that made sense, but this will really vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, and so it's probably a good idea to try and find these values. You want fuel consumption of the equipment. If the equipment fully runs on electricity, you want to look at how much electricity it'll need, and of course the price that you've been quoted. It's very important to note that these values come from ranges. I think they vary depending on which one you choose, yeah, to some extent. But these are just estimates. It's quite possible that you'll find some manufacturer, maybe of a diesel APU, who will give you a much different price quote than this. So these are just the default values. You should find your own. Okay. All right. So let's look at it. I've got everything filled out. I've got what I want to look at. I've got values for these. Now I can just go over to the IR tab, and this is kind of tricky. You don't have, these are some secondary inputs that you can put in if you want. Anything in yellow and orange is up for changing, but you don't have to look at that if you don't want to, but it's a good idea to kind of just make sure. And this calculator is very large, especially when you consider that oftentimes a lot of these are closed, but I guess they're all open right now. Yeah, it's very large, so I wouldn't really look through this unless you like, you know, being a little obsessive. Oh yeah, and so the reason why I've got a divide by 0 error right here is because this is for the fuel operated coolant heater column, and as you can see in inputs, we said that 0% of our hours right there were for that, so that's why we're getting the divide by 0 error. So just ignore that because we don't need a fuel operated coolant heater. So why am I even having that in there? Let's just have that be 0. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now we look at the outputs and we're pretty good to go. It gives you a payback of how many years it'll take, because when you're using these technologies, you're saving fuel for the most part, which saves you money. And so if you factor in the cost of the equipment versus how much money you're saving on fuel each year, you'll get a payback. And, you know, it's good to look at. You can see how much, because the technologies will cost you to a certain extent, so you can kind of compare which ones will cost more, which ones will cost less. You can look at the air pollutants. As you can see, here's just the air pollutants for the regular idling, and here's the, you know, for a APU battery. Maybe here's the estimates for air pollutants of that, which you can see they're much lower. You can look at some externality costs. And then we've got little graphs of everything. Here's a simple payback. These are blank because we don't have any values for light duty right now, so yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Just make sure that your inputs are all good, which might be, this will take a little while to fill out. Make sure you've got the right things selected up here, and kind of take a quick glance at this to make sure that the technologies are the way you want it to be. And then take a look at your outputs. So that was a bit lengthy, but thanks for sticking with me. I hope this helps. Again, it might be kind of tricky to find the data that you need for the tool, but if you can get some values for this, you'll get much better estimates. Take care.